Thank you for coming. Tonight, I'm going to share with you the biggest scientific news of our lifetime. That is that widespread fraud has been uncovered and documented in the field of human evolution. Fraud being defined as a scientist knowingly misleading others. Many people have suspected all along that ape men, the theoretical evolutionary animals between apes and humans, were either frauds or lies or just made up stories. But since the fossils of ape men were kept off limits, not only to the public, but also off limits to other scientists, it was impossible to verify that ape men were real. 27 years ago, my wife Debbie and I embarked on a project to rectify this lack of access by filming a television documentary on human evolution for national television. During this time, we photographed hundreds of original ape man fossils in the basement vaults of museums and universities all over the world. In this process, we documented 150 acts of fraud. The frauds involved the most common ape men, such as Lucy, Neanderthal man, Homo erectus, Homo habilis, Prometheus, Toomai, Zinjanthropus, and many, many others. Now that these frauds have been unmasked this year, at the beginning of this year, Darwin's theory of naturalism, that is, that everything came about naturally, has been overturned. And I'm going to show you that at the end of this talk tonight. Human evolution was the last pillar standing in the theory of naturalism. Now that it's collapsed, naturalism has collapsed. And like the cover of Time magazine asking if God is dead, now it's time to ask, is naturalism dead? Now I want to present all this new information, and I'm going to now go to slides. There's a difference between a fraud and a mistake, and I'm not talking about mistakes tonight. That would not be so earth-shattering. Mistakes in the field of human evolution or any field are not purposeful. They're just an overzealous scientist making mistakes, a mismeasurement by mistake, a misinterpretation of a bone, or just plain bad scientists, bad science. But fraud is not a mistake. Fraud is evil, and it's ominous, and it's dark. A fraud is defined as a scientist knowingly misleads by any means, including lying, altering photos, fossils, diagrams, hiding the most critical information. And now I'm going to give you some of these frauds by human evolution scientists. Now, all this is new information. This is not out in the public yet. So you won't find this on the internet yet. You can find it in our books and videos, but don't expect to go home and Google this stuff because it's all fresh, okay? So Dr. Johansen found Lucy, and he was actually involved in 3 frauds that we documented on Lucy. These weren't mistakes, these were frauds. Let me tell you about Lucy. Lucy started out as a discovery in 1973 of this knee joint. And that's all he had. And he said it was a human-like knee, but it was very small, like a small creature about 3 to 3.5 feet tall. The following year, he found the full, a partial skeleton in a different location in that region. And this skeleton is called Lucy. And Johansen's point was that because of the knee joint, Lucy was an upright walking, human walking ape man. And it all revolved around the knee joint because every other part of her anatomy, like her brain size was ape, her arms were really long like ape, her legs were really short like ape, her fingers were curved like ape, her face stuck out like ape. So everything was ape, except the knee joint. And he said, gee, this is an ape with a human knee, and therefore this is an ape man. And here's the first fraudulent statement that he made. He wrote in the yellow here, all detailed anatomical analysis and biomechanical considerations of this knee joint indicate that the hominid or ape man possessing it, Australopithecus afarensis, that's a species name of this creature, was fully capable of upright bipedal posture and gait. Now that's his words. All analysis, that would mean not only his analysis, but everybody else's analysis, all came to the same conclusion that this was from a creature that walked upright like a human. But we interviewed his partner in Paris, Dr. Yves Coppens. Now, Yves Coppens was at the Lucy dig site. He was the co-director of the Lucy expedition. He is considered, like Johansen is in the United States, Yves Coppens is considered the discoverer of Lucy to the European people. But we interviewed him, and it was a very surprising interview because we set up our cameras and I asked him, Dr. Coppens, what was the knee joint of Lucy, knowing that he was going to tell me that the knee joint of Lucy was human, because that's what Johansen has said for 40 years. He built his entire case, and he wrote that all biomechanical analysis was that it was a human knee joint. And it was so surprising. My jaw dropped to the floor. We asked him, what was the knee joint? Was it human or ape? Knowing he's going to say human. And he says, the knee joint of Lucy was more looking like an unstable ape-like knee. See, it wasn't all analysis that said it was a human knee. His own partner, who analyzed it, said it was an ape knee. And so that was a fraudulent statement he made. Then we also interviewed a former student of his. This is the late Dr. Dwayne Gish, who was a creationist, and he attended a lecture by Dr. Johansen early on in the 70s and at Berkeley. And in the lecture, Dr. Gish watched Dr. Johansen present the information that Lucy's knee joint looked like an ape knee joint, but then he dismissed it. So even Johansen's own analysis of the knee joint was that it was ape, and yet he told the public for the last 40 years that the knee joint was ape. And I don't know why anyone didn't catch this earlier, but it just so happened we got these two interviews on camera. And by the way, everything's documented here. It's all on film, and you can see this in our television series. The second fraud Johansen made was about the Laetoli footprints. Now, this is a convoluted story because they found Lucy in Ethiopia, Afar, Ethiopia, but 2 countries south of there and 1,000 miles to the south in Tanzania, Mary Leakey found some human footprints. And Dr. Johansen said that these human footprints found 1,000 miles from Lucy proved that Lucy walked upright. Now, let me explain how he got to that point. See, it was very distant from where the fossil was, but he said that at the location in Laetoli where they found the footprints, the only hominid or ape man or human, the only hominid that they found there was afarensis or Lucy. In other words, you got human footprints, and the only ape men or humans that are found at Laetoli is the Lucy type. They weren't Lucy because Lucy's 1,000 miles north, but there were just more examples of what they call Australopithecus afarensis. And so he said, well, who else could have made these footprints other than Lucy, since she's the only hominid found there? It's kind of a hollow argument. I get it. But, you know, we'll go with it. Then Debbie and I, during this television miniseries of filming of it, flew to Tanzania, and we met with the former director of the National Museum in Tanzania and said, we'd like to photograph all the fossils that were found at Laetoli. And the first one they brought out was LH1. L stands for Laetoli, H stands for hominid, and 1 was the first fossil found. The first one was just a fragment of a tooth. It wasn't even worth taking a photograph. LH2 was a afarensis or a Lucy type lower jaw. LH3 was an afarensis lower molar tooth. LH4 was an afarensis lower jaw. LH5 was an afarensis, upper jaw. So you get the idea. We're going there, and I'm sitting photographing these fossils that are found at Laetoli for hours. Okay. Once we got to LH18, again, I had to pull my jaw off the ground, because what does he pull out? Because LH1 through 17 were all afarensis or Lucy type fossils. What was LH18? It was a human skull. See, he knew about this too, and I can show you the documentation. He knew that a human skull had been found at Laetoli, and yet he said that the only fossils found there was the Lucy kind. But no, a human was found there. So it's possible that the human made the footprints too. Now, people are wanting to change his words now and say, well, wait, he didn't say that, but he did say this. Now they're saying, well, really what he meant to say is in that layer, but there was other layers, and then it gets into be a very convoluted argument. But this is a fraudulent statement. You can try to rework it, but that's not honest. This is what he said. He fooled me for 40 years. I believe this statement. And then only to photograph a human skull from Laetoli, that was shocking. And his third fraud was this pelvis. Now, this is a photograph from his book, Lucy to Language, of the pelvis of Lucy. But it didn't start out like this. If you'll notice, let me see if I could, I guess I can't, let me see if I can get my magic marker thing here to work. Let me see if I can make this. You'll notice here, can you see that, Danzel? This is a pelvis, and it goes out to the side. It doesn't turn forward like a human. And this is Lucy's pelvis bones on display at the Chicago Field Museum. They're not assembled. These are copies. But this looks like an ape pelvis because it doesn't turn forward. A human pelvis turns forward, but this just goes out sideways. Now, here's another copy of the Lucy pelvis. Again, it's a plaster copy, and I asked the scientists to assemble them so we could take a picture. But again, the pelvis goes out sideways. It doesn't turn forward like a human. If you reach down in your front, where under your belt, you can feel your pelvis bone after it's turned forward. So this was a problem for Dr. Johansson because he found an ape pelvis for Lucy, but it was supposed to be a human walking animal, upright walking. So this is very problematic. So what do? Because he's already falsely building this whole argument on the knee, which was also false, saying that the knee was human, but it wasn't. It was ape. And now he says, well, how could I have an ape-like pelvis to go along with that knee joint? So he decided to cut it up and adjust it. Before he cut it up, here's another picture of it before it was cut. It goes out to the side. And here's another picture of the pelvis before he cut it up. This is a side view. If you're standing on the outside and you see the hip going in here, and you'll see this doesn't turn forward like a human pelvis, but it just comes out sideways like an ape pelvis. And this was very problematic for him. And so what he did is he cut the pelvis bones up. Now let me say what I mean by cut it up. He had another plaster copy of the pelvis, just like this one. And what he did is he took, and you could see this grinder here. He did this on national television on Nova. He cut it, boom. He cut it, boom. He cut it, boom. Danzel, can you see me cutting with the yellow? You can just shake your head. Hey, Danzel, can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good.
Yes.
So he cut it 3 times, and then you just can't cut it. Then you have to grind the edges away, and then you have to rotate this thing all the way around. And then he ended up with this pelvis rotated. He cut, it rotated. Why did you do that? Because Lucy walked upright. How do you know it walked upright? It had an ape pelvis. Well, because it had an ape-like knee. I mean, a human-like knee. But it didn't have a human-like knee. It's just the whole thing gets terribly convoluted. But this is not a fraud, believe it or not. This is just bad science, very bad science. But this isn't fraud. He did it on national television, and he told people what he was doing. He said, I know it looks like an ape, but I'm going to change it into a human. I think that after Lucy died and fell into water, like an antelope stepped on her pelvis and changed the shape of it, which is, again, a crazy argument. And but here is what is fraudulent is this picture. And this is what he publishes in his book, From Lucid Language, on page 87. And he said, this pelvis, which is now human-shaped, is evidence of bipedalism. But in his book, he never tells the audience that this pelvis is cut, ground, and reshaped. And here is what's fraudulent. He only had the left pelvis here, this side. On the right, he had no bone, so he puts a plaster in, and whenever you put in plaster, you put it as white or black, but some color to indicate that it's not real bone. So he indicates this is not real bone. Got it. He just made a copy of this side. But look at what he did here. Remember, he cut this 3 times, 2, 3, then had a grinder. Then he pulls this bone forward. He doesn't show that with white plaster. In fact, he makes this look like real bone. See, this should have a white stripe, and a white stripe, and there should be indications here that he changed this. And he never tells the audience. And he's showing a human pelvis. Well, of course, everyone that's gullible took this in, like myself. I was gullible on this one. I didn't catch it. So that was his 3 frauds. And now I'm going to go to the next 8-man set of frauds. I can't do all 150 tonight, by the way. I'm limited on time, but we're going to try to do 10 or 15. And then if you want to see all 150, you got to watch the video series, the last 4 episodes of the video series. But I'm going to give you a taste of some of the best frauds that we came upon. The next one is this 8-man, so-called 8-man called Homo habilis. And this was found by Dr. Louis Leakey, and it was promoted by Dr. Louis Leakey and Philip Tobias. But Tobias took the lead, saying that this fossil was a large-brained 8-man. Now, why would he want it to be a large-brained 8-man? That's because apes have a small brain, around 500 cc's. Humans have a brain about twice that size, or about 1,000 cc's. So if you want an ape man, it has to be somewhere between 500 and 1,000 cc's. So they argued. And so they said, well, this one is not 500 cc's. It's around 600 to 700 cc's. And so it is the 8-man from Olduvai Gorge. And the thing is that he manipulated the skulls. He altered the skulls, not once, but 3 different times. So here's the first one he altered. This one is called OH7. This was the very first specimen that was found. It's called OH, Olduvai hominid, number 7. It's the 7th fossil they found there. And it's the type specimen. It's the one they said, okay, all other scientists can come to our museum and look at this type specimen because the type specimen is like the holy grail for this species. Everyone will bring their fossils to compare it to this fossil, and you just don't mess with a type specimen. Let me just say that. You put it in as is, okay? So this is his published photograph of the left skull piece of Homo habilis. I didn't see anything wrong with this. I really didn't. There was no letters A and B on there, by the way. I put those in here for the talk. It just looks like a skull piece. But Debbie and I, again, traveled to this museum and we photographed the same fossil. Now, at the time, I didn't realize I was going to be finding a fraud, so I didn't photograph it at exactly the same angle. You can see that the camera is a little bit higher on my shot, but you get it, it's the same fossil. And when I placed my fossil photograph and his published photograph, I'm like, what is going on here? They don't even look the same. First of all, B. There is no B. And I'm like, where is B? And I knew I photographed the entire fossil. And I went back and looked at this and look at B on his picture. It's plaster. You see the texture and the color of it? It's plaster. He didn't tell people that he enlarged the skull by adding plaster, which that is just unfounded. You just don't make something bigger than you want it to be. And then fossil segment A, the fragment A, really looked odd to me, both when I photographed it and when I put it next to the picture. See, you can't see it in his picture. It looks good in the picture, but when you, okay, now I'm going to flip this over, okay? Now I flipped it over, and here's A. A, on the real picture, the color, mine, doesn't even look like it's the same skull. And you'll notice it's attached with a straight line. Now see, there's fragments of skulls all over, and if you don't have a puzzle-like fit, you can't be assured that it's that part of that skull. So this one isn't a puzzle-like fit, and he also had to add plaster where that red arrow is to make it a straight line. And you know, the fossil could be a different color if it sat out in the sun and the rest of the skull didn't, but this looks so suspicious to me. And also knowing that he had altered or added B. So that was not just that side. The right skull piece, oh, there it is again. The right skull piece was the same thing. He added a piece here too. Again, you can't really tell what's going on with his published photograph, but on my photograph, you can see it doesn't look like it's from the same skull. It's straight lined, and that could have come from another animal. And so I had the terrible job then of reading his boring 400-page monograph, like what's going on here? This is a waste of my time, but I had to read it. And then I found the answer is, here it is. In his monograph, he acknowledged that the right skull piece was pieced, this is a type specimen, pieced together from a number of fragments found separately. So they could be 500 yards apart. They could be animals that are totally disconnected. This is just so bizarre. And it's so clear to me after I took the pictures that he was enlarging his skull. He wanted to have an 8-man skull, intermediate. He wanted to make it bigger. But it was only the first of 3 frauds. His next fraud was Homo habilis skull STW53, which wasn't found in Olduvai, but down in South Africa. And ST53 was these 14 fragments or so here. That's what he found. He asked his colleague, Dr. Clark, to assemble them into a skull. Now, Dr. Clark, we interviewed him, and you can watch the interview. And he's an expert on assembling skulls. He's recognized by all his colleagues that he's really good at this. So he assembled this. So here's the front view. See the eye sockets? Now this skull is the same as this skull here, and it's the same as this skull. It's the front view, underneath view with the spinal cord, and the side view with the side of the head here. These three skulls are the same. All three of them were put together by Dr. Clark. And Dr. Clark brought the skull back to him as recounted by Dr. Clark during our interview, which you can see in the television series. Dr. Clark then takes this skull, this skull, back to him and says, well, here you go, here's your skull. And he says, Ron, I'm very dissatisfied with this. This is too small. He says, I want you to make it bigger. He says, make it bigger? I can't make it bigger. What are you talking about? You know, he said, well, it's supposed to be a big, large brain ape man. And I want you to take it apart and reassemble it. He says, I can't do that. The parts go where they have to go. In other words, if it's a midline part, it has to go into midline. If it connects to another bone, it has to connect to that other bone. You just can't separate the bones. So Dr. Tobias then goes behind the back of Dr. Clark and asks another scientist who was actually just a graduate student. He didn't realize what he was getting into. And he says, would you, Dr. Curnow, my graduate student, take Dr. Clark's skull that I think is too small and take it apart and make it bigger? And he says, sure. So here's the before and here's the after. And you can see this. I don't know if you can see how he elongated the skull here and how he put more plaster here. And it's a ridiculous exercise. And when we interviewed Dr. Ron Clark, I'm not going to play the audio because audios just don't work very good in Zoom. So I'm just going to show you the interview, but you can watch it with the audio in our videos. He said this was a fraud, and he said it was a fraud bigger than Piltdown Man. He said it was ridiculous. He had no right to enlarge a skull, and so he called it a fraud. It wasn't me on this one calling him a fraud. Then the next fraud was a third Homo habilis skull, OH16, and here it is. Here is my photograph on the left. I photographed this in the museum today in the vault. And you'll notice these bones right here, they connect. And you'll notice these bones right here, they connect. But here is his reconstruction. He does the same thing. He pulls the bones apart here. You see that? They were connected. He pulls them apart to enlarge it. Look how fat and wide the skull is. And now he has a large brained ape man. Look here. Look how far he widened this. He did it two different ways, but each one he's separating bones when they should have been connected. And that was his three frauds. Now, I see Dancel shaking his head up there. Are you enjoying this, Dancel? It's crazy. Okay, now the next 10 frauds was Dr. F. Clark Howell. This wasn't manipulating fossils, but this was manipulating a diagram. And this diagram you have seen 100 times in your lifetime. Dr. Howell, we interviewed him, wrote the Time Life book called Early Man. And he was the one that created this chart, which has 14 animals in it, showing a small ape going to a human at the end. And you need to pay attention to this one. The title of the chart is The Road to Homo sapiens. So he's saying the ape on the left, Paleopithecus, evolved into a human, and it had all these intermediate steps. But Howell knew this diagram was fraudulent. He knew this was wrong. And I'm going to tell you why and what he did. He knew that 5 of these animals were not ancestors to humans. This one, this one, this one, this one, and this one. He knew that 5 of these were not ancestors into human. Now, how do I know that? Some of it was from interviews, and some of it was from his own words. Like even this one, in his first one, Paleopithecus, it looks like the modern ape called gibbon. He says it's an ancestor of the gibbon line. It's not an ancestor of human. So actually it was all there. I missed this the first 2 times I read this book. And this one, Proconsul, he says it's not an ancestor of human, it's the ancestor of the chimpanzee. But I guarantee you 99.9% of the population did not analyze this and figure this out, that what he was doing. And Dryopithecus, we had to go to his graduate student. When we interviewed his graduate student, he said, no, he did not think this was an ancestor to human. Same with Oreopithecus. He says it's an aberrant ape. It's not an ancestor to humans. And the fifth one was Paranthropus. He said it's an evolutionary dead end to humans. In other words, it doesn't go to humans. It's a side branch. So those five were frauds. And then this is the most fascinating thing. And again, I missed this myself until I did these interviews. And when the scientists were saying, no, these aren't ape men, these are humans, was that he put in the last five animals into his chart, five Homo sapiens. Now, you can't put in five Homo sapiens into a chart saying on the road to Homo sapiens. You only get one to put one Homo sapiens. Otherwise, you could put in 50 Homo sapiens, say, gosh, we found 50 ape men, 50 ancestors. No, you only get one Homo sapiens, and he acknowledges, and you can even tell now in retrospect, this one is called early Homo sapiens. Well, that's a Homo sapiens solo band. He says it's an extinct race of Homo sapiens. Rhodesian man, an extinct race of Homo sapiens. Neanderthal man, he says in his book that this is Homo sapiens. And Cro-Magnon man, everybody knows that that's Homo sapiens. So in his chart, 10 of the 14 animals he knew did not deserve to be there. And subsequently, we uncovered that there were three others that were frauds by other scientists that he would not have known about. So really, there was only one animal that wasn't a fraud, and this one has been eliminated, but it wasn't a fraud. So that's why I didn't put an X through it. All of them have been eliminated as being the intermediate animals. Let me put it this way. All of them have been eliminated to be not ape men, including this one, but this one was not a fraud, so I couldn't put an X through it. So there you go. There's the most influential piece of science that affected the world wide for 50 years, and it was all baloney. The next one is Richard Leakey's frauds, and again, don't expect to find any of this on the internet. It will be soon, but once people start writing about it, but this is just in our books and our videos. So Richard Leakey and his partner found Turkana, and this was a Homo erectus. And see, we had skull pieces of Homo erectus all the way back to the 1890s, but this one was a full skeleton, basically. And so this was like the biggest find to finally find out what Homo erectus was. Was it an ape, bent over, or was it look more like a human? And the problem with Turkana is from the neck down, and evolution scientists agree with this, agree with creation scientists. Everybody agrees from the neck down, this is human, looks like Homo sapiens, looks like a modern human. It's only the head that looks like an ape man. Well, why does the head look like an ape man? Because the face sticks out in front of the brain case. See, here's the end of the brain case in red, and see how the face sticks out another inch or two, like a chimp. See, humans' faces are flat. The bony parts are flat, more or less, whereas chimps and gorillas, they go out. That's why it looked like an ape man. And again, the reason that we were able to uncover this is we got access vis-a-vis the film company to photograph these fossils. So I photographed the original skull, and I put my skull photograph next to his. Now, I don't know if you caught the fraud, but you just missed a fraud. Did everybody catch the fraud? Because I'm going to explain it here in just a second. I don't expect you would, but you could have, if you're really smart, which I'm not, you could have caught that on the three photographs that I just showed you, why this is a fraud. But I'll show you. I was stunned when I saw this fossil, because as I'm a physician retired, look at the space here he puts here. See, a human skull has no space between these two bones. Even a 10-year-old like this skull is. He separated the front of the skull from the back for the purpose of altering the face position. He also, notice here, he puts in black plaster so you don't notice it, but he's created another joint here, and you can't see it in this view, but he's created another joint here. There's space, space, and space. But watch his published photograph. His published photograph is altered. Do you see the difference between the published photograph and mine? He draws your attention to, quote, missing bones with white plaster. But the original skull has no white plaster on it. And this really confused me. It's like, wait a minute, the missing bone is here, but it's in black. Why is it in white here? And then if this is missing bone here, why don't you have this white? And I wrote Richard Leakey after we photographed these side by side. And I said, Richard, and I wrote the museum curator. I said, I'm confused here. First of all, how did the white get on the photos? No one could tell me. They were photoshopped, unless someone could come up with a better answer, but they were photoshopped. But they only Photoshop some where they want your eyes to be drawn. They don't want your eyes to be drawn to these alterations where my red and white arrows are. And then the second thing I said, he's not a doctor, Richard Leakey's not a doctor, but I said, Richard Leakey, I said, Richard, I was surprised because the body of Homo erectus from the neck down looks human. And yet this skull of Turkana Boy looks ape because the face is sticking so far out. And I said, what do you think? And I just kind of left it up to him. And he answered, and you could read all these emails in volume 5 of my book series. Richard Leakey says, it's wrong. He said, you're saying it's wrong. He said, yeah, it shouldn't be. The face shouldn't be sticking out so much. Now, I don't know if he said this because he knew he was about ready to die, because this is about a few months before he died. I don't know why he gave me such a clear answer, but this was a photo alteration, which is a fraud. By the way, his family altered 3 skulls this way: Zinjanthropus, 1470, and this skull. Each time they're altering the position of the face so they can move it in or out for creating an ape man. So you can read about that in our book. So I've given you about 15 frauds. I don't know how many exactly it was, but I'm going to take this one step further, and I'm going to step out in front of the crowd because nobody else in the world is talking like this right now. But I've lived this, and now I understand the implications, and it wouldn't be fair for me not to tell you the rest of this. Now, this is Carl Werner. There's many people would disagree with this, or say I'm crazy, or I'm trying to get rich quick or something. But this is the honest feeling I have of the assessment of evolution. First of all, that human evolution collapsed. Now, why did it collapse? Well, first of all, there's 150 frauds. I just showed you 15 or whatever. The second reason human evolution collapsed, here's the 150 frauds and which species were involved. And then I'm going to give you the list of what scientists were involved in these frauds. So it's a lot of big people, a lot of big fossils. Then the second reason that human evolution collapsed is that in our book series that we just released, we documented 232 species of ape men that are no longer ape men. They said they were an ape man, but now they're not. So they're reclassified as not ape man. And so this is, in other words, 232 times they mistakenly said this fossil or this animal was an ape man. Excuse me, I had to get a little sugar for my diabetes here. Excuse me. And you'll notice that they renamed these animals many, many times over. Like Lucy has 8 different names to it. And Homo erectus, they have renamed it 45 times, giving it 45 scientists found that Homo erectus, and then they said, oh no, it's not Homo erectus, it's Homo atlanticus, so they could get credit that they found a new ape man. So that's the second reason human evolution collapsed. The third reason is there's been 42,000 mistaken stone tools where they would pick up an ordinary rock and say, oh no, this is an ape-man tool, only later to come along and say that the ape-man tool is just an ordinary pebble or rock. And here's some pictures. And again, this is new information. Nobody has these pictures. And it's well documented in volume 5. These all turned out to be ordinary stalactites, ordinary rocks that were misclassified as ape-man stone tools. The fourth reason that human evolution collapsed was that there was 200 bone tools that were called out, and they turned out to be not a bone tool. They turned out to be just an ordinary bone. For example, Raymond Dart, he's very famous. He said, oh, this is an ape-man scrub brush. This is his words, not mine. It's just a jaw of an antelope. And he said, yeah, see how the ape-man would pick up this antelope jaw and he'd use it as a scrub brush? I mean, it's crazy. That's crazy ideas. And here's an ape-man saw, and it's just, again, it's just a bone. So there were hundreds of these ape-man bone tools that have been overturned. And the fifth reason that human evolution collapsed is that there's been hundreds of mistaken age assignments. In other words, they can change the age assignments any time they want. For example, the Libyan ape man, it was first said it was in the Pliocene rock layer, then the early Pliocene, then it changed to the Miocene layer, then it was in the late Miocene, then it was in the middle of Miocene. It changed from 5 million years old to 6 million years old to 7 million years old to 8 million years old. And that's typical in this field. And here's another one from my book, Nebraska Man, which turned out to be a pig tooth. It's 1 million years old, it's 2 million years old, it's 3 million years old, it's 4 million years old, 5 million years old, et cetera, et cetera. And the sixth reason that human evolution has collapsed is that the ape-man fossils are hidden. And this will be surprising to you, but the evolution scientists are hiding their fossils from each other. And we interviewed Dr. Brunet for Tumai, and it's the latest ape-man. We did an interview in his office in Paris. We flew to Paris to interview the guy. And after the interview's over, I said, can I photograph the copies of the fossils on your desk here? No. Could you send me photographs of the original skull? No. I guess I'll have to photograph the skull at the museums. Well, I'm not sharing those with the museums either. All museum skulls of Tumai are wrong. Could you send me the CAT scans then? No. See, he won't share it with anybody. And these are my experiences of who wasn't sharing fossils. Like, we flew to South Africa, had an appointment with Dr. Berger for Homo naledi and Sediba, get off the plane. As soon as he found out that we're interviewing his nemesis, Ron Clark, he says, you can't photograph my fossils. See, at this point, we should have access to all these fossils to verify that this idea that humans evolved from apes is true. But all of these fossils are inaccessible to some, most, maybe, I don't know, but they certainly, I can tell you each experience why they were inaccessible. And the seventh reason that human evolution collapsed in 2024 is that the fossils are fragmentary. You would think at 160 years or whatever we are since Darwin wrote his Origin of Species, we would have 28 men, full, complete skeletons, and they're all in progression. And what we have is fragments, and we have fossils that are incomplete. Even Lucy is supposed to be so great, but you can't really know the length of her arms and legs because the fragments are missing, and her full skull, et cetera, et cetera. And so the current ape men are trash. They're either fraudulent based, or they're fragmentary, incomplete, or they're inaccessible. And if that's the best proof you have, human evolution is the best proof of evolution. If this is your best, then naturalism has collapsed. And I want to show that to you in a diagram how this is bigger than just human evolution collapse. This is the moment really we've been all been waiting for. This happens about every 200 years where a scientist disproves a big thing like Galileo and Copernicus or Pasteur or August Weismann. These guys just totally upset the cart where they disproved the whole thing. The whole thing collapses. And this is a moment I never thought I would ever say this out loud. Never did until this year. It's like, Carl, you got to be honest. It has collapsed. And here's why. You've got to watch the diagram. I wouldn't expect you to believe it without this diagram. This is naturalism. The universe formed naturally, life formed naturally, animal groups formed naturally, and then you have the fossil record, you have the mechanisms of evolution, and then you have the three best proofs of evolution. But I want to show you this entire chart is off. It's collapsed. The origin of the universe. Let me tell you why origin of the universe doesn't work. The Big Bang violates all kinds of science laws, and physicists and astrophysicists from the big universities, Cambridge, MIT, will tell you that it doesn't work. Because, for example, there's a law, physics law, the law of conservation of mass and energy. Mass and energy, like atoms and energy, cannot be created from nothing, and it cannot be destroyed and made into nothing. It can be transformed from one form to another, but you don't get matter from nothing. And yet that would be violation of a natural explanation of the universe, because you have to come up with either matter or energy to start the whole process. That's a violation. Compression of all of the matter into a spot smaller than the period at the end of a sentence, as they believe in the Big Bang. The laws of physics break down. When you have that, excuse me, that much compression, you should have monopoles, monopoles forming. They don't, and they should still be around today. You can't find these. You should have, when you transfer energy into matter, you should have antimatter, but you can't find that in the universe. It should be lots of it, as much as there is matter. And by the way, this isn't my field, but I'm just trying to sum up what these physicists said. And it just goes on and on and on. There's books and videos by secular evolution scientists that say the Big Bang doesn't work. So why do they believe it? Because they believe that the fossil record and ape men prove naturalism. But they say, well, we don't really know exactly, but we got the ape men and the other good proofs. The next one is the origin of life. See, then they have to, if you think that the earth formed naturally, then you would say 4 billion years ago, there was just non-living things on earth. It was like a new star kind of a thing. And that it was just rocks and dust on the surface of the earth. But somehow these rocks and dust mixed up and formed a bacteria, a small one-cell living bacteria. But the problem is that all of the necessary components to start life, that's DNA, RNA, proteins, and enzymes, they never, ever, ever, ever form naturally by mixing up rocks, dust, chemicals. You can do anything you want with them. You can never, ever, ever, ever create DNA, RNA, enzymes, or proteins, or a functional cell membrane. So that doesn't work either. Why do they believe it? Well, we know it happened because we have these human evolution fossils. See, they're holding out for the next group. Then the origin of animal phyla. So you have to then go from a bacteria to the 7 animal groups. That would be like corals, sponges, segmented worms, fish, or the vertebrates, echinoderms, whatever, the 7 groups. But the problem is that, and evolution scientists would recognize this, is that there are no intermediate animals between a bacteria and the 7 animal groups. They just suddenly appear. For example, the corals, the the first coral is about a foot and a half tall. It's a sea pen. And there's nothing between the bacteria and the sea pen. The first fish is in the lower Cambrian from China, and there's nothing between the fish and the bacteria. And the first sponge, it goes on and on. So this does not work. And I would take another lecture to go over that. But just let me tell you, that doesn't work. But why do you believe in evolution then? Because we have the fossil ape men. And then the origin of animals within the phyla. Okay, you can't see the animal groups forming, but how about within the phyla? Let's just do vertebrates. Does that show evolution? No, it doesn't. For example, bats. They found 1,000 fossil bats, but there's no ancestors of bats. Pterosaurs, 1,000 pterosaurs, no ancestors of pterosaurs. Fish, 500,000 fish, no ancestors of fish. It just dinosaurs, 100,000 dinosaurs have been found, no ancestors to any dinosaur species. And you can get all that in volume 1 in my series. So even further out, the animal groups just don't work, except there's these 3 best proofs of evolution. They say, well, we don't have this, but we do have these 3 best proofs of evolution. And by the way, the mechanisms of evolution do not work. That would be a 10-minute discussion. I'm not going to do it. But the mechanisms of evolution, that is mutations, chance mutations, is impossible. And I would have to explain it to you later. So they are believing in all of naturalism on 3 best proofs. And that's walking whales. They said, well, at least we have proof that whales evolved from a land animal. And Debbie and I had the honor to do the interviews that tore this down. We interviewed the 2 scientists that came up with this idea, and they found 3 animals that they said were walking whales: Ambulocetus, Pachycetus, and Rhodocetus. And all 3 of them on camera in our video series admit that they had added flippers when there were no flippers. They added whale tails when there was no whale tails on the fossils. They added blowholes when there was no blowholes. So that's the best proof you have. See, it's not a proof. This is the best proof. Walking whales is the best proof. And yet in 2 5-hour interviews, we took that down. The next one is feathered dinosaurs, that birds evolved from dinosaurs. And there's approximately 15 things wrong with that. For example, the scientists at the Smithsonian don't believe birds evolved from a dinosaur. And you'd have to read his letter in our book, volume 1. And the second problem is they're adding feathers to dinosaurs that they never found dinosaur feathers on those dinosaurs. For example, like the Jurassic Park, when the kids are being chased through the kitchen, and those 2 dinosaurs, they've now put feathers on, even though they've never found feathers on those dinosaurs. And the third problem is that they don't know what dinosaur a bird evolved from. The fourth problem is that there's a lot of fraud in this field, because the fossils of the, quote, flying dinosaurs or the feathered dinosaurs are coming from a significant small area in China called Liaoning, and they have an industry of creating fossils. And you can see that in the movie called The Dinosaur That Fooled the World. I'm not going to go through all those, but I would love to do that with you some other day. But flying dinosaurs. So why do we believe in naturalism? Because we have ape men and we have all these proofs. But I just showed you, ape men it's a house of cards. It just fell. So once ape men falls, there is nothing. You cannot defend this naturalism. Now, I'm not saying evolution. I'm saying the whole thing. Big Bang, origin of life, fossils, animals starting. The whole thing collapsed in our lifetime. And if this doesn't make you excited, it makes me almost tearful as I say these words. This is crazy that this just popped out of nowhere. You know, I'm now at the end of my talk. Let's see if I got it. Oh, I got 4 minutes, Danzel. Thank you for not jumping all over my case, Danzel. So Danzel's my timer, So anyway, this information is going to do us no good. the people that are here in attendance, it's going to do us no good. It's going to do the world no good if Carl Werner has his information and you kind of have it and then that's it. No, this has to get to the kids, and the kids need this information terribly. So I'm pushing. If there was one thing you could do as a thank you for coming to this talk, would be find out how you can implement our 4 semester curriculum that I go through basically everything we talked about tonight. It's it could be used in homeschools, public schools, religious schools, whatever. And each book has a teacher's manual and a video, and these videos are shot on location all over the world. They're beautifully shot. Debbie filmed them. And so that would be my takeaway. Please, if you have kids, start the program. If you have a school under your authority, please get them to start. And it starts in 7th grade and it finished by high school, and you can do it any way you want, but it's very palatable. The kids love these books. They really do. They'll stay up all night reading the book when it arrives to the house. And for the audience, then, not for your students, I would ask that you consider watching the video series. And you can either watch it on your phone or you can watch it by DVD. And the best way to get to that is to go to our website, thegrandexperiment.com, and watch the site. And just one more thing is, I'm not doing this to get rich, because I always tell, every time I give this talk, it's like, I am not getting rich. In fact, I'm getting poor by doing this. And it's my joy to get poor. But I'm hawking these books not because I want to get remunerated. I'm hawking these because I want the world to flip here. And like, this is it. This is it. We just need to get this out to the rest of the world. So this talk should not have been named Widespread Fraud in the Field of Human Evolution. It should have been named 2024, the year that naturalism collapsed. So that's all I have. I'm going to turn it back over to our MC, Danzel, and thank you for your attention.